All right, so welcome to the Ear Kick podcast number 8. And today it's about burnout. Burnout is very frequent, it's everywhere, and 75% of the US workforce have experienced burnout symptoms already. This is huge. Stress and burnout creates costs in the US of over $500 billion per year. Today, I welcome Dr. Erica Simon. She's founder and CEO of Series B. She is a clinical psychologist, healthcare consultant, speaker, and tech industry advisor. She has provided services to a number of forward-thinking leaders and organizations, ranging from two-person startups as they scale, like Herd, to tech unicorns like Modern Health and Twitter. Across her work, she's witnessed the impact that problematic work environments can have on the people within them and has become an expert on burnout and stress. So welcome, Erica.
Thank you so much, Herbert. It's really a delight to be here today.
So thanks for having you here. First question, what exactly is burnout? Can you explain?
Well, I think what you're speaking to with your initial, those are just staggering numbers when you think about it. 75% of the US workforce, and then just how much cost it incurred, we incur because of it. Burnout is actually a very poorly understood phenomenon. And I probably shouldn't even put it as a phenomenon, because we think about burnout as if it's something that's in our mind. It's something that has to do with how well we can be resilient, or we can push through, or whether we have tenacity. And that burnout means that we don't quite have enough of any of those. That's how we tend to think about burnout when we just normally are considering what does burnout look like and what does it entail. But actually, burnout is a physiological phenomenon. It's so much more. And this is something that across my time as becoming a burnout specialist in the field of psychology, I've come to really understand that burnout is really this collection of experiences that we have, where we talk about the quote unquote definition, where we can say it's where our the demand within the workplace, or our demand of our lives, overwhelms our resources, our personal or professional resources. But it's really so much more than that. I think that burnout really comes from a place, from a societal level. We have this idea that our sum total of our worth is our productivity. And it really comes both in our work environments and our home environments. We talk about being weekend warriors. We really think about ourselves as being we're productivity engines. And that, I really think, is where burnout comes from. Whether it is in the workplace, or whether it is what we're doing in our homes, or whether it is what we're doing at the societal level. Burnout is where we really see ourselves as just an engine for productivity. And when we start thinking about it in a little bit of a different way, then we start having different solutions to the problem. So I think we need to start thinking about burnout a lot more nuanced, in a lot more nuanced way than we even talk about it currently, even at the level that people are understanding what burnout is or isn't.
So you're saying it's actually a problem that we make ourselves, that to put so much pressure on us to be productive, that productivity leads to burnout?
I think this really is the underpinning of what burnout really is. It's this idea that we're supposed to be productive. When you think about how we've evolved as humans over time, we're really meant to kind of go in between different kinds of energy states. We're not meant to be in this engine productivity mode all of the time. Even when you think about it, even you go back to the times where there were people working in the fields for many, many hours from sunup to sundown. At some point there was sundown, and then we had to gather around the fire, and we had to have that renewal state. There were natural ways that we went into renewal state, and oftentimes together as a society, as a community, as a group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I fully understand. But how about, for example, myself? I love my work. It's just so thrilling, and it's amazing. There, of course, there is some kind of competition, because I want to thrive. I want to develop a great product to make something really cool. And there's always a bit of pressure. But for me, this is more positive, actually.
I think what you're speaking to is something that's also very important for us to understand about stress. So we talk about stress as if it's bad. Actually, a little bit of stress is good. And it's interesting that you're saying what this exact point is important. There was some interesting research that came out that found that it wasn't necessarily the number of hours worked per se that led to burnout. We'll talk a bit about the hours that can contribute to burnout. That whole body of literature is quite interesting. But what they found was that it wasn't necessarily how many hours per se, it was whether or not you were in that always on mentality mode.
Mm-hmm.
So whether or not when we're off, we're truly off, and when we're on, we're on. And that's the thing. We're not very intentional about our work anymore. We just sit there. It's they call it the butt in the seat phenomenon, where people will be sitting at, and the more hours that you're sitting there, that is how we show our productivity. And then what ends up happening is we spend more and more time being less and less productive in those hours that we're working, because we don't actually let ourselves be totally and completely off when we're off. So think about this. What happens when you're off and you're checking your iPhone, or you're checking your mobile phone, you're checking your Slack, you're checking your email, you're not really present for the things you're doing when you're off of work. How many of us are guilty of that? I know I am. It's so easy. Our phones make life so completely and totally accessible at all times. And what that does is it creates this always on mentality. And then we get stuck in this tricky spot when we're taking off. And how many of us feel guilty about it? How many of us feel guilty when we're doing self-care, self-maintenance, doing things where we're just loafing off and doing nothing of importance? We have this whole idea in our modern society that to be lazy, to be bored, to sit around and do absolutely nothing, we kind of feel embarrassed by it. And that's where the tricky part is. It's not necessarily about when you really love your work and you feel really fulfilled by it. That's not the problem. The problem is that a lot of us are doing work where we don't see the purpose. You see the purpose in your work probably every single day. You wake up and go, I feel meaning and purpose in this work that I do. And it probably feels really exhilarating. That's crucial. And then when you're off, being really off and leaning into a disciplined pursuit of rest and play, that's where we get that energy renewal piece. And there has to be that balance. But once you start getting more and more and more into that always on mode, you're going to get less and less productive, even if you believe in the work you do.
Yeah, that's a very good point. For me, it takes real discipline to go into this off mode because work is so exciting. But I know that it's a marathon and it's a sprint at the same time. So if I don't recover, as in sports, then I will not get very far. So, but it takes a lot of discipline to say, now, today I'm not going to do anything, or now at like 9 o'clock, usually for me, it's off time, no screen anymore. And I just don't check my emails. On weekends, I don't check my emails. In the mornings also, I actually first check my emails at noon. It's the first time I check my emails. So I hear you, that takes a lot of energy and discipline. But what are the warnings? If I would go into this always on mode, what are the warning signs?
So I think everybody has something a little bit different. And in the work that I do, I help people figure out what are their signals for that they've been in that always on mode. So I think, and you said something really important. So you said about being an athlete, you have to have that disciplined pursuit of the rest as an athlete as well. And what you're actually speaking to is this idea in sports psychology called ideal performance state. We can talk about that in a minute. But the trick is to find what your personal signals are for when you are way too much time in that always on mentality mode. And for me, I know it's when I start getting really annoyed at music. That is my very first signal. I love music. I love dancing around in my living room. It's one of the ways that I renew myself. I love music. And when I start noticing that I'm skipping a lot of songs on Pandora because they all feel just a little bit whiny and annoying, that is my absolute signal. Okay, I've got to get out of my chair. I need to spend an entire weekend, doing something completely immersive. I have to do something because I've probably spent too many evenings or weekends working. So this is what you have to decide. What are you going to figure out for yourself? How do you tap into those signals? So there's different kinds of rest that we all need. And sometimes what ends up happening is we can lean into those different kinds of rest to understand where we might be experiencing this burnout mentality. So is your sleep feeling really off? Are you not really maybe exercising in the way that you normally do? When you do exercise, do you actually feel like it's renewing you, or do you feel like it's just making you more tired? Those are important. Are you noticing that you're withdrawing from relationships in your life? This is a really important one. Are you noticing that you just don't have time to eat away from your desk? Are you noticing that you're maybe not enjoying the things that you usually enjoy quite as much? There are some things that are very common amongst all of us. And then what we do is we can kind of take that deeper level and understand, what is your initial signal for you? What is that first signal that you are spending way too much time in work mode? And then what you do is you just make that effort to check in with yourself regularly. You can check in with yourself at the end of the day. You can check in with yourself at the end of the week. This is really about getting on top of this, staying ahead of it is really how we have to address burnout.
Okay, that's really insightful. And now saying I got a burnout, how severe is that actually? I've heard of there's two kinds of burnout. So sometimes work-related depression, so overwork depression is diagnosed as a burnout, whereas I've heard that the real burnout is when the autonomous nervous system is completely broken. So the first one takes a couple of months of recovery, and the second one takes years of recovery. And even that is not guaranteed that the person is gonna recover. So what does science say about that?
So I think what you're speaking to is first of all, how long have we been in burnout? So how long have we been in burnout? How long have we been depleting those physiological systems? So this, again, burnout is about our physiology. So what burnout does is it taps into our survival wiring. It taps into our threat detection system, our survival wiring that's been evolving over many millions of years. And it's really about, how do we deal with a threat in the environment, a physical threat in the environment? That is what our modern stresses, that work stress, that being in that always on mode, that is tapping into that survival wiring. So it's really, if you might have heard of fight flight mode, it's the same thing. So what's happening is, at a physiological level, we have cortisol and adrenaline coursing through our body. Our brains, actually, it's really quite fascinating. The part of our brain, the frontal lobes of our brain, the part of our brains that make good decisions, actually go offline. There are all sorts of changes in our respiration, in our heart rate, in our blood pressure. What this is doing is our body is preparing to fight or flee a danger that's in the environment. The thing is that when you are dealing with a physical threat, it goes away at some point. So our bodies we have an autonomic nervous system that pulls us into that, threat mode, that survival mode, and then we get pulled back into recovery and rejuvenation mode. What happens with modern stress, though, is our bodies stay in that threat response mode. A physical threat has a beginning, a middle, and an end, but our modern stress does not have that. So what happens is that over time, our bodies, which we have been adapted to dealing with ongoing, threats, there has, across our history, war and famine, et cetera. But even then, at some point, those threats end. And with modern stress, what we have to do is we have to recognize that if we don't pull ourselves back into that recovery mode, what's happening is all of our physiology is getting depleted. There's a point where our cortisol response, which we have a cortisol response, every one of us has it, that it goes up in the morning. And this is actually a big part of our cortisol response in the morning, is a big part of how we feel energized and ready to meet the day, and then it goes down across the day. This is our natural response. What happens with burnout is that cortisol response, cortisol is not supposed to be pumping through our blood all the time. So essentially, you can think about it this way. At some point, if you have a finite resource that just keeps on getting pumped out, at some point, you don't have that same resource anymore. this is what happens with our physiology. When we stay in burnout for too long, we just deplete our neuroendocrine system. And then we don't actually see that cortisol response anymore. It's blunted. We have this with our heart rates. Our heart rates are meant to have a very natural response with our breathing. So when we breathe in, our heart rate increases. And when we breathe out, our heart rate decreases. Again, this is our autonomic nervous system regulating our physiology. It's actually really beautiful.
Yeah, that's
at
really
some
beautiful.
point,
Yeah.
think about how amazing it is. Our respiration is the only part of our physiology over which we have voluntary control, and it actually connects to every single aspect of our physiology. So when we're breathing, we're meant to breathe in and breathe out. The exhalation is supposed to be about twice as long as the inhalation. And we have a beautiful physiological response that happens at the deep autonomic nervous system level when we're at rest. And then our bodies do this amazing thing where when we are in a stress response, our bodies really activate and bring together all aspects of our physiology to deal with whatever that thing is that it needs to. But our bodies can't stay in that. We have what's called surge capacity. Surge capacity is our body's response to that ongoing stressor that maybe lasts a little bit longer than that tiger that's standing in front of us, ready to pounce. But at some point, even our surge capacity becomes depleted. And so what we have to do is we have to recognize this. And then if we don't get ahead of this, at some point, our breathing, our blood pressure, our heart rate, our autonomic nervous system, it all gets depressed to this place where we're not actually actively responding to the environment in the same way anymore. So you have sort of these initial stages of burnout where, okay, we have some depletion of energy resources, but if we would actually get out of that system, if we get out of that situation, our bodies would naturally pull back into that parasympathetic response in our autonomic nervous system response. Our bodies are amazing this way for recovering. But when we've pushed ourselves past that resource, when basically there's no gasoline in the tank and there's no gas station in sight, it could take years for us to actually recover that physiological adaptability and response to the environment.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And what has burnout to do with that quiet quitting? Can you elaborate on that?
I think this quiet quitting phenomenon has been quite fascinating to me to just kind of observe over time, because to me, a big part of what I do in my work with burnout is I help people understand how to show up in their jobs with enough. What is enough? We don't necessarily define what enough is. When you think about it, we have this very deeply embedded, implicit belief that is programmed into us that when work is done, work is not done. Yeah. If you think about it, even when we're kids, what do we have? You get out of school, and what do you have when you go home? You have homework. Think about that. You sometimes kids these days can have 4 hours of homework. Thinking about this with quiet quitting, to me, when I first heard about it, I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is a bunch of people just doing their jobs. Instead of saying, I'm going to do 4 jobs, instead of working the 60 hours a week, I'm going to actually do what my job description says I'm supposed to do. And originally I was like, yay, this is really phenomenal. I love this. But then I realized that there was something deeper in here, because this gets to the very heart of burnout. A lot of people are so burnt out. And it's not necessarily about them just doing their jobs. They're disconnected. They're not engaged in their work. They're not thriving in their work. They don't see that sense of meaning and purpose. They feel like they're a cog in the wheel, and they're so tired and they're so burnt out. This is the thing with burnout as well. There's a lot of mental health aspects that are connected to it. We get irritable, we get angry, our relationships suffer. And at some point we just kind of get that disconnected bit of what burnout how it can show up in our work. So I think quiet quitting has something in here that's a great lesson. And that's that we can't just keep pushing people the way that we have. We can't just see people as a cog in the wheel. It's not going to work in the long run. And we also have to recognize that people need to feel that sense of meaning and purpose. to feel like what they're doing matters. And if we don't actually have that sense, if we don't give the people on our team that sense of purpose, then they're also not going to be able to give what they would like to even give. Like what you feel, Herbert, you wake up and you feel that sense of purpose in your work. And because you do that, the effort feels less. You feel less effort for the same amount of time. You're going to be more productive with less feeling of effort in that same amount of time, and you're going to get more work done.
Yeah, but it can also be dangerous, I guess. But on the other side, then I think there is also some responsibility from the manager on the manager side. It's like a trainer. If I compare again with elite athletes, the trainer says today you have to do an easy run. And often trainers have to tell their athletes to do easier than they do their easy run. And sometimes also they have to say it's a day off. Once per week, it's a day off. You don't train, you don't do anything. It's off. No sports at all. And I think managers have the same responsibility to tell their teams, look, don't overdo it. Be aware to take that time off, to care about yourself. And to do maybe just an easy day, some administration work or something, and just cleaning up the emails that are stacking up. What do you think?
I think it's brilliant. And it really does speak to what the research shows. So it's interesting going back to that ideal performance state that I mentioned before. So there's this concept in sports psychology actually called ideal performance state. And what it is it's about managing our energy states. So we need to oscillate between energy expenditure and energy renewal. When you're an athlete, you have to do this. When I was training for a marathon, I was completely surprised by the fact that there were days across the week where you were told you absolutely cannot do anything. You can't lift weights, you cannot run, you cannot do anything. And then at the very end of the marathon training, there were like 2 weeks where you did absolutely nothing. And this made no sense to me. I'm thinking, am I going to lose these gains that I've made over these many, many months that I've trained? The interesting thing is that that's actually where you get your strength. With athletes, your strength comes from your recovery. Yeah.
That's what they say. Amateur athletes, they focus on the training, and elite athletes focus on recovery.
Exactly. There's this wisdom to this. There's this wisdom to the recovery piece of our physiology. So when you're pushing, what happens? If you overtrain, what happens?
Yeah. Then you get injured and you can't run anymore in the worst case.
Exactly. And then sometimes you can sustain an injury that takes you completely out of the game.
Completely
Out of the game. So we all know people who will run and they're all taped up and they're just trying to push through that, plantar fasciitis. And it's at some point we have to let our bodies give us that information about what we need to do. And that is exactly what happens when you're an athlete. You have to listen to the wisdom of your body. There's the 80-20 rule. You're supposed to train hard 20% of the time and train extremely easy at 80% of the time.
Exactly.
Because we don't have to necessarily go into all the very interesting details of why that is the case. But our physiology is made to where if we don't do 80% at a very low rate, we're actually missing out at bumping ourselves up in certain kinds of gains that we can only make if we are training at that 80%, well below what most people do. Most people live in this middle, this gray area. Exactly. I can't remember what it's called, but there's this gray area where we're not training hard enough at certain times to really get the gains, and we're not training low enough to kind of bump up this threshold. And it's the exact same way as for us as humans, just in our in our work. Exactly. If you think about our work productivity, it's the same.
Yeah. Yeah. So you also suggest to take some breaks during the day to just do some breathing exercises, close your eyes for a moment, do some meditations maybe.
Yes. So I am a big believer in a disciplined rest and play ethic. And we can do the rest and play in a lot of different ways. How many of us, just thinking about that, Herbert, I don't know how much if you're a super playful person, but like thinking for most people who are listening to this, it's like, oh my gosh, like I'd be embarrassed to tell people, what did I do to play today? We don't think about it. Or how many of us see that we glorify overwork, and we kind of see rest as it's a little bit embarrassing to say, oh yeah, I took this time off. So we need to lean into this disciplined pursuit of rest and play.
Yes.
Because what we do when we do this is we're actually making gains. And if we can have that switch in how we think about things, whether it's the manager encouraging their team member to take time off and really rest and recovery, or it's us as individuals. So we can tap into different ways to rest and play. For example, ultradian rhythms. So most people have heard of circadian rhythms, which is our day, night. It's how we transition with our sleep, wake sleep cycle. It's approximately 24 hours, but for a lot of us, it's a little bit longer, which kind of can screw things up. For everybody, we also have ultradian rhythms, which are about 90-minute rhythms that we feel of energy expenditure, and renewal needs across the day. So we can only really focus on something for about 90 minutes, and then we need to recover. So sitting down, focusing for 90 minutes, and then getting up, going for a walk, doing a quick meditation, doing a quick breathing exercise, you will feel better. You will be able to sit down and focus better and function better if you allow yourself to tap into that rhythm. We can do it daily. There's the energy expenditure renewal. When you're on work, be on work. And when you're at play, when you're resting or you're off, be truly off. We can do this across the week during the weekday versus the weekend. There's a lot of ways that we can do this. And I highly recommend doing activities that give you the biggest return on your time investment. So what's something that you do that after you do it, you feel this great sense of energy that's kind of surging? For me, again, it's a 5-minute dance party of one in my living room. That is what I do. How about you, Herbert?
Yeah, for me, it's a breathing exercise or going outside. Outside is really very energizing for me to go into sunlight, even if there's no sun shining, but just be outside. That's very recovering for me. And actually, yesterday I was measuring my body battery with my Garmin watch, and during a breathing exercise, so I put 10 minutes, the timer to 10 minutes, and I saw that my body battery went up. So that means that my stress level was so low during that time, and I was focusing fully on the breathing, not on work or anything else. I tried to just focus on my breathing. That really helped. Whereas walking outside is, I think, even more, it's even better for you, I think, because of the fresh air for your brain. It gets oxygenized, whereas breathing also, actually, it's difficult to say what's better or not, but I feel really great after both.
Well, I think you're speaking to you're rejuvenating yourself on the physiological level. So our breathing, when we breathe, we tap into, we pull ourselves into that parasympathetic mode. So we pull ourselves naturally out of that fight or flight response that we are experiencing in our modern world. What also is interesting is that there's great research around the power of nature, both water, being near around water, in water, but also being in nature with, there's something called fractals, and that's the repeating patterns in nature. And interestingly, they've done research where there's an almost instantaneous physiological reduction in our stress levels. They've looked at this with MRI studies and EEG studies. Our brain waves shift out of a more stressed mode into a more relaxed mode within it's something like 60 seconds of being in nature. We see it literally in our brains and our bodies. So this is a great example of return on your time investment. Going outside, being near water, doing a breathing exercise, in that just anything that you can do. Walking is a way where we're reestablishing that physiological balance. So all of those are great.
Yeah. So as our close followers already know, I'm a free diver. So I feel very relaxed. Even if I just see water, it makes me relax. All my muscles go offline, and everything relaxes in my body if I just look at water. And this is actually also something that helps a lot. What else can we do to tackle burnout, to address burnout?
So I think this is at the very baseline. If somebody is experiencing burnout, the number one, first and foremost thing I focus on is sleep.
Sleep.
Sleep changes everything. Sleep is our foundation for everything.
Yeah.
If you are in burnout and you have a choice between getting up early and working out or sleeping, sleep.
Yeah.
It really is important. We also need different kinds of rest. So we need physical rest, both active and passive. So active rest is more something like yoga, doing breathing exercises, things of that sort. We need emotional rest, creative rest, where we do something that generates some feeling of creativity. We need to have sensory rest. We need to be somewhere where we don't have all this input of all these devices. This modern world is so loud and noisy. This is where we can get that sensory rest in nature. There's something called non-sleep deep rest, which if you look it up, it's really fascinating. It's a way where we can, within like 18 minutes, you can get, it doesn't quite replace sleep, but it's a way that you can put your body into this recovery state that's really helpful. So non-sleep deep rest. I think that relationships, we are social creatures. We are meant to be in community. And the number one thing that burnout does really, when it comes down to it, is it disrupts our relationships. It disrupts our relationship with ourselves and with other people. And for my fellow introverts out there, this isn't about being around a whole bunch of people. This is about finding those relationships that feed you, that nourish you, making sure that you're leaning into those relationships and being fully present.
Yeah.
Burnout leads to exhaustion, and that exhaustion makes us disconnect. Be present with your partner, with your family member, with your best friend, with your kids, with your pet. Be fully present in that moment. Ground yourself in the present moment. Look around and see what is actually there. Look up. How many of us spend our time looking down, looking at our computer? Even if we're in nature, we might not really see it. Take this beginner's mind, look around as if you've never experienced this place before. Bring a sense of wonder and awe. Make sure that you are tapping into these more sort of existential aspects of what it means to be human. And give yourself a break. Give yourself permission to take that time off, to know that your sum total of your worth is not your productivity, that you get to have a loafing off day where you can do nothing of importance, and that what you are doing is you're actually being productive. It's a different kind of productivity. Give yourself that permission to do absolutely nothing and relish in it. Be just so indulgent about it. And then invite other people to do the same. If we start inviting each of us starts inviting the other person, and we call ourselves in to this beautiful thing called being a human, resting, playing, seeing the entirety of our human experience as it is our birthright. We get to have that. It is a basic right. And when we start calling each other in on this, it becomes a little bit of this sort of like subversive, act of resistance in this world that tells us that that's not what we get to do.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. And you mentioned sleep. There is an amazing interview with Rich Roll and Dr. Matthew Walker. It's a bit long. It's about 3 hours, but the link is in the description. And if you have time, you can listen into it. It's amazing. And it actually, Matthew Walker, he says that sleep was once considered one of the pillars that actually that support your mental health, but now it's been how do you say, now actually it's counted as the basis, as the foundation. Sleep is actually the foundation of everything. So if you don't sleep, you don't eat well. If you don't sleep, you don't exercise well. So it's the basis of everything. And the second one about the relationships, there's the Stoics who say, and also the Buddhists, that the time you're alive is right now, and you can die anytime. So take the time to spend with your relatives, with your kids, with people. And I know, I mean, before, not so long ago, when my kids came and I was working, I was there like, go away, I have to work, I have work to do, and so on. And now I really take this time consciously and tell myself that life can be over at any time, any moment, for myself or my kids. You never know. So take this moment to be with people while they're still alive. Then that's so life-changing, actually. Yeah.
It really is. And I think that's such a beautiful sentiment. We don't necessarily think about how each moment truly is this precious gift. And there are a lot of ways that we talk about, mindfulness and Buddhism has become a lot more embedded in our modern kind of psyche in this way, in kind of Western thought in a way that I think is really beautiful. Because what we need to do is recognize that this is all we have, this moment, and then this one, and then this one. And how do we want to spend those life minutes? My mother always says, growing up, she'd say, you can choose how to spend your life minutes, or you can let somebody choose how to spend your life minutes for you. And this is the thing, every moment, it really is precious. And we have the ability to choose what this moment means. And what it looks like. And I think if nothing else from this time together today, if there's that little tiny bit of permission to even begin to think about this, then I think this podcast did what it needed to do.
This is a very good closing words. Very good closing words. Thank you so much, Erica, for being here.
Thank you so much, Herbert. I really enjoyed this time together.